critical facilities use critical equipment. Sooner or later, this critical equipment is going to fail. And this is why it's very important to have this equipment under service contracts and maintenance agreements. In today's episode of the Power Grid, we're going to be talking about service contracts at the time of purchase and maintenance agreements for ongoing maintenance for your critical equipment. Hello and welcome to the Power Grid, a podcast that helps you build reliability in your electrical system and gives you confidence in power. I'm Brian Brannigan with Power Protection Products. We have been solving power quality problems for almost 30 years. We're your trusted advisor for critical power, cooling, and energy solutions. Welcome to the show, Amy. We're so happy to have you here on the Power Grid today. I know that you have a lot of experience in the service contract world and maintenance agreements, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of maintenance agreements and ongoing service contracts. So thanks for being here.
Well, Brian, thank you. First of all, I'm very honored that you asked me to be your first guest on the podcast. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
Fantastic. We're so glad you're here. So Amy, let's get right into it and talk a little bit about service contracts in general. Mm-hmm. Why is it very important for critical equipment to have service contracts?
Right. So if you think about service contracts kind of on a higher level, there's several components that we need to think about, whether or not you're going to want to purchase a contract, right? Or have a service contract be part of the project. There's the skilled technicians, like who is that technician learning from? Is it from the equipment manufacturer, or, is it through a third party somewhere, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so that's very important, and that's, a good first question to ask when you're engaging someone.
Sure, a qualified technician to service the equipment.
Yes.
Very important.
Very important. So we need to find out whether or not the company has access to be able to do the proper assessment of the power and cooling needs of the facility, right?
Yeah.
We want somebody to come in who understands the environment and the equipment that they're putting into the environment.
Sure. So the right person with the right knowledge is very important when doing a service contract.
Right. And so just to continue to follow that same step or thought process, then next, they're going to be the person who can potentially help us prevent potential problems, right?
Sure.
Because they are knowledgeable about the equipment, they're knowledgeable about the environment, and they can then help you assess potential issues that might come up.
And make adjustments at startup.
And make recommendations.
That fine-tunes it for the purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, we want to make sure that if there are problems with the equipment, that we have quick and accurate troubleshooting, both with getting a technician there timely and then getting parts if needed and being able to do the repairs that would be needed.
Okay, great. Is there an advantage to buying the service contract when you're purchasing the equipment?
Sure. First of all, a lot of times customers have funding available in capital budgets that they may not have subsequent, right? So buy maintenance up front through the original equipment manufacturer, and then they can have peace of mind. They don't have to worry whether or not the equipment's covered for a number of years.
And are services discounted at the time of the equipment purchase more so than if they were to buy services later?
Generally speaking, that is true. Oftentimes when new equipment is purchased, there is a deeper discount that is given to a customer, and the services can roll into that as well.
Okay. So Amy, tell me why it's important to have a factory-trained technician involved in the startup services.
That's a good question, Brian, and it is very important. One of the most important things is that having full warranty coverage on the equipment can oftentimes be mandated that the factory technician does the startup.
Yeah.
And not just either a local electrical contractor or somebody else. Yeah.
Just getting that warranty registered correctly and
Yes.
started by a factory technician.
And when the factory technician is the one starting it up, they actually handle all of that paperwork for you and get it submitted. So the warranty coverage is automatic and you don't have to worry about sending in any paperwork or calling in and making sure that it's covered.
One of the things that I've noticed about factory startups is that you get a great report that tells you all about the UPS system or the piece of equipment, and something that you can go back to time and time again to learn more about the system.
Right. Yes. And as someone who's selling ongoing maintenance contracts often to customers, I use that report a lot. It is an excellent report. It includes serial numbers and the model number that was purchased, the date it was installed, and even talks in detail about all the testing that was done when the UPS was started up.
From a startup services perspective, what are some specific tasks that can be performed by a factory trained technician?
Right. So the factory technician will come in. Oftentimes there's assembly services that are required that they perform. Not necessarily electrical work, but assembly of the equipment.
Yeah.
They make sure, however, that the electrical and mechanical installation was done properly.
So double check the contractor
So they
work.
double check, and make sure before. And that's an important reason, too, to have the factory technician actually do the startup, because they are checking that and not just flipping a switch, starting it up without double checking. So the factory technician will also do testing once the equipment has been started up to make sure that everything's running properly and within the requirements that the manufacturer recommends. And finally, they will do on-site training with the individual or the group of individuals who are going to be maintaining that equipment on a day-to-day basis within the facility, and help them to understand how the equipment works, to be able to run the display so they understand if there would be an alarm or anything going wrong with the unit, what to do and how to make those calls if needed.
That factory training at startup is so important, because in a time of an emergency, or if the equipment goes into some sort of an alarm, most people don't know what to do.
Right.
But they have an opportunity to either go through their training or go back to their training. Some people videotape the training or document the training.
Yes.
But that's when you need it the most, right? Is in an emergency situation.
Yes, and that's the time when, everyone's stress level is up, and it can be, there's a lot of maybe even pointing fingers or just trying to figure out what's going on, and to know the first step, second step, third step, and feel confident in that is important.
It's also extremely important that when doing the factory startup training, that the actual operator is in the room being trained, because sometimes it's not the actual operator.
Yes, and that is exactly why we want to ensure that it's factory trained field service techs that are doing the startup services.
Amy, after the initial installation and startup by a factory trained technician, why is it important to have an ongoing maintenance contract for the equipment?
Every day I talk with customers who are on both sides of that, where they do have peace of mind because they know that there is a team of qualified technicians that are going to back them up when the equipment has a problem. And the other side is the constant concern and possibly fear of what's going to happen if something on that equipment fails. So that is the primary reason why I recommend a maintenance agreement.
So a maintenance agreement gives you peace of mind. So Amy, what sort of things can you expect in a maintenance contract on equipment?
Right. So a maintenance contract typically includes what we call a PM or a preventive maintenance visit on the equipment, typically once a year. You can opt into more than one a year, but typically one. And what that visit does is it gets the factory technician on site, eyes on the equipment, testing certain aspects of the equipment and making sure everything is running properly. Also, in that same thought process, as equipment goes through the life cycle and they're starting to age out power modules, batteries, the technician prepares the manager or the operator that we need to start planning for some repairs or maintenance on the equipment throughout that life cycle.
So it's good to have somebody from the factory on site every now and then just to touch base with the equipment and make sure that it's working right.
Correct. And they are also an excellent resource if the operator has questions while they're there. Ask those questions. They see that equipment every day and usually know the answers.
One of the things that I've noticed is when these factory trained technicians show up, they bring the latest version of the software with them.
Yes, and that is another thing, and it's a selling point when I'm selling contracts to customers that you cannot get the firmware and software updates needed if you're going through a third party or you're not on any type of maintenance agreement. You need to have a factory service contract from the original equipment manufacturer. And it is very important, especially in this time where, there's hacking and all kinds of security concerns and breaches going on. You want to make sure that your software is up to date.
So Amy, let's talk a little bit about these factory trained technicians that show up on site for the preventative maintenance. Mm-hmm. What are some of the benefits that they bring with them when they show up?
Well, the number one is that typically it's a quick response time. When you have a maintenance contract, you are basically a preferred customer. And if you have a problem with your UPS, you're fast-tracked to get a tech out to you. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You also have access to parts, and that kind of goes along with them quickly sending you a tech. You also they will overnight parts. If there's parts, they have some warehouses in towns throughout the country where they store new parts. They can have them delivered same day oftentimes. But that is through the factory service contract, not necessarily a third party contract.
Okay, mm-hmm. Good. What are some other benefits of a factory trained technician?
Well, we've kind of touched on this, but the factory field service engineer, they're trained to do troubleshooting on that specific equipment. Mm-hmm. And so they may already know that, there's this typical issue that happens and how it happens. And so they can go out there and identify that and hopefully quickly get you some resolution. Mm-hmm. And then if resolution is not possible quickly, they have a team of really qualified, I think they call it the Tiger team, possibly, that actually they can take these problems to, they can troubleshoot them as a team and come back and service the customer. So you have a lot of support on a lot of levels when you have a maintenance agreement.
Good. Amy, I'd like to set up a scenario with you and have you explain the situation and what would happen. Let's say that I have some critical equipment in the middle of nowhere, but I'm relying on my local contractors and my local people to take care of the equipment, but I get to a point where I have a catastrophic breakdown, but I'm not under a maintenance contract. But I do call the manufacturer and ask for support. What happens typically?
What happens next? So I've had this situation multiple times occur, and it can be painful. The first thing that they do is troubleshoot over the phone. They do try to identify the parts that might be needed and send you a quote. And so you have to do what they call a time and materials quote, where you sign off, pay with a credit card. They give you an estimate of the cost, and they usually estimate high initially, and it can be shocking, the number. And then that has to be returned. It has to be processed, all before they will ever start shipping parts or dispatching a technician. Okay. So that's the first pain point. Once that process has happened, it could be days, possibly even weeks before they actually see that technician come on site, depending on technician availability and where they're located. And that's just due to what I had said before, where the customers that are under service contracts get priority service. So those customers are the first priority for any type of on-site work, and then they take care of anyone who would be on what they call time and materials.
I know often the cost for the time and material for one incident was more than what the maintenance contract would have cost for the whole year.
And in most cases, that is true, Brian, because you're talking about a minimum of 4 hours labor, and they start portal to portal. And so
does portal to portal mean garage to garage?
It does. It actually does. And then if they're spending an overnight in this middle of nowhere town, all of those costs get wrapped up into the repair.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And there could be, multiple visits that need to happen. And again, you're charged, labor for every hour that tech is on the road for your work. So that brings me back to make another point with a service contract. If you have an issue, a repair problem you've called in on, they will come out 1, 2, 3, 4 times, however many times it takes to get your equipment repaired back to factory standards, and there's no charge to you.
Amy, I'm so glad you came here to talk about service contracts, particularly the things that are required for startup services and then ongoing maintenance services.
Right. So to recap, we're definitely looking in startup services to have that skilled technician who is qualified through the equipment manufacturer. We want to have someone who can come in and assess the power and cooling needs as the expert. We want to be able to make sure that they help prevent potential problems in your facility, right? Above all else, we want to avoid problems. We want to have the customer feel confident in their power equipment.
Amy, I had no idea what it took to maintain critical equipment and how important certain aspects of that maintenance agreement were.
Right. And just to be able to recap for you what a service contract looks like and what you should expect from a service contract, you want to see a preventive maintenance visit at least annually, maybe more often in that coverage. You want to have access to 7x24 online or phone support with the ability to then have that technician online dispatch parts and a field service tech quickly to you. And you want them to have access to new manufacturer replacement parts. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but you see a lot of refurbished parts out there on the internet and in the secondary market.
Sure.
And you really always want new original manufacturer equipment.
Replacement
Parts.
Parts are hard to find if you're not doing business with the original manufacturer.
Correct.
Yeah. Amy, thank you so much for being on the show. I had no idea there was so much involved in initial contracts and maintenance contracts for critical equipment.
Well, Brian, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me on to the podcast and for learning a little bit more about service contracts today.
Well, Amy, thank you. And I know that we can learn more about service contracts and maintenance agreements by going to the podcast notes.